After I started noticing that affirmations weren't quite landing, I became more aware of something else. Not what I was saying, but what I was asking. At first, it wasn't obvious. It wasn't like I was sitting there consciously forming questions. It was quieter than that, more like a background pattern that had always been there, just unnoticed. Why does this feel so hard? Why can't I seem to get this right? Why do I always feel like this? They weren't dramatic thoughts. They were familiar, almost automatic. And because they were familiar, I never questioned them. I just lived inside them. What I began to realize slowly was that my mind wasn't ignoring those questions. It was answering them. Not in full sentences, not in a clear, logical way, but in something more subtle than that, in what I noticed, in what stood out, in the small pieces of evidence that seemed to confirm whatever I'd already asked. If I had asked, even quietly, why something felt difficult, my attention seemed to move towards everything that supported that. The moments where things didn't work, the parts that felt frustrating, the evidence that made the question feel true. And the more that happened, the more the original feeling was reinforced. Not because it was objectively true, but because I kept seeing it. It's a strange thing to notice because it doesn't feel like you're doing anything. You're not actively choosing to focus on the negative. You're simply responding to what feels real. But what feels real is often shaped by what you've already been asking. There's a kind of loop in this. A question creates a direction for your attention finds evidence, that evidence strengthens the question, and the cycle continues, quietly, in the background. For a long time, I thought my thoughts were just reactions, that I was noticing what was already there. But it began to feel less passive than that. More like I was participating in what I saw, without realizing it. I noticed it in small, ordinary moments. Walking through the day with a vague sense that things felt heavy, and then seeing everything through that lens. Conversations that felt slightly off, tasks that took more effort than they should have, a general sense of things being harder than they needed to be. Nothing dramatic, just consistent, and consistent enough to feel convincing. But when I began to shift the question even slightly, something else happened. Not instantly, not in a way that felt forced, but gradually. If I stopped asking why something felt so difficult and instead held a quieter, more open question, my attention began to move differently. I noticed moments that felt easier, small things that worked without effort, interactions that felt lighter than expected. Those things had always been there, I just hadn't been looking for them. Or perhaps more accurately, I hadn't been directed towards them. Because that's what it began to feel like. Not that I was changing reality, but that I was changing what I was able to see within it. There's something almost disarming about this realization because it's not about control. It's not about forcing yourself to think positively or ignore what's difficult. It's about understanding that your mind is already doing something very specific. It's scanning, filtering, responding all the time. And the direction of that response is influenced often quietly by the questions you carry, even the ones you don't consciously choose. Once you see that, it becomes difficult to go back to thinking of your thoughts as neutral. They're not just observations. They are signals. They are shaping what stands out, what repeats, what feels reinforced. And over time, that begins to shape how your life feels. Not all at once, but gradually, in small, almost unnoticeable ways. The way a day unfolds, the way you interpret an interaction, the way you feel about yourself in a quiet moment. All of it influenced, at least in part, by where your attention is being guided. And your attention is not random. It follows something. That was the part that stayed with me. The idea that my mind was not just thinking, but answering. Not just reacting, but responding to something I'd already set in motion. And if that's true, even in a small way, then it changes how you relate to your own thoughts. It makes you more curious, less reactive, more aware of the patterns that sit underneath what feels obvious. It doesn't mean everything becomes easy. It doesn't mean you suddenly see everything in a positive light. But it does create space. Space to notice what you've been asking. And whether those questions are quietly shaping your experience in ways you hadn't intended. This is where the shift begins. Not in trying to control every thought, but in becoming aware of the direction they're already taking you in. In the next piece, I'll share the way I started working with this more intentionally, in a way that felt natural, not forced. Something softer than affirmations, but more effective than leaving your thoughts to run on their own. I'll link it here once it's live so you can continue the series. For now though, it might just be enough to pause and notice. What questions seem to repeat in the background of your day? And what do they lead you to see? Love, Georgia.